Welcome, everybody.
Okay, I'll wait one more minute and then we'll just get started. Okay, so we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement, but we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement that was created by students. So both Rosa and myself work for Natural Curiosity, but that is a program and a resource that is based out of the Dr. Eric Jackman Institute of Child Study Laboratory School. And the land acknowledgement that I'm about to read was created by the grade 6 students who'd spent a year working with the teacher librarian to learn about the true history of our country, about Indigenous people, about residential schools, but also about the present present issues within Indigenous communities, and also the resilience and strength of the Indigenous communities in our area. So the grade 6s knew that they had to do a land acknowledgement at their grade 6 graduation. And when they looked at the U of T land acknowledgement, they sort of said, this just doesn't feel right for what we've learned so far this year. So they worked on creating, in partnership with the teacher librarian and an elder for the university, working to create a new land acknowledgement, as well as working with Doug Anderson, who's the Indigenous author of the second edition of Natural Curiosity. So this is what they came up with, and it is a living and breathing document that is intended to change as we and the school learn more, and the students, of course. So this presentation, their graduation, begins with the land acknowledgement, because we will be using the land and need to respect this place where Indigenous people have lived and continue to live. We wrote this to share some of our learning and to teach others. We thought about who would be hearing it, and we didn't want to make it too complicated or too simple. We would like to thank the first peoples of this land and all of creation, including the animals, plants, land, water, air, rocks, trees, and all that exists on this beautiful earth. We honor the Indigenous people whose traditional territories include the land on which we gather today: the Petun, the Wendat, Mississaugas, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and other nations whose names we no longer remember because of the impact of colonialism. We want to honor the treaties that were made with the land and between First Nations and the Crown. Treaties should be honored no matter what political party is in power. The story of Canada that most of us know is not the whole story. We have been learning from Indigenous sources about losing language and culture through residential schools, and also about ceremony, celebration, and strength of community. When we're thinking about doing something to the land, like dams or pipelines, we should ask Indigenous people first, because they lived in balance with nature for thousands of years. We have lost our relationship to the earth by doing things like polluting and taking too much. We need to ask ourselves, what is more important? What I get out of this, or what happens to the land? We need to think 7 generations ahead. What we do today, how will that affect tomorrow? And we invite you to do the same. So again, we just wanted to share what we think is a much more meaningful land acknowledgement, especially because it came from students, but it also pushes us to sort of think, okay, we acknowledge the territory that we are from, but also starts the conversation around, and then what, right? What does this compel us to do? So I encourage you to think about when you read a land acknowledgement for the territory that you're coming from, what does that compel you to do to continue this conversation? Okay, so Rosa has put a link to more information about the land acknowledgement in the chat. And we also, Natural Curiosity offered a webinar with Krista Spence, who is the teacher librarian that worked with the grade 6 students. So she talked about her process of creating the land acknowledgement with the students in this webinar, if you are more interested in learning about that. So, and we just want to say welcome. Thank you for joining this workshop on natural curiosity. And also at any point, please pop your questions, or if you have other resources or ideas that you want to share with the group, please feel free to put those in the chat, because this is a presentation, but it's also a learning community where we know that there are many people who are joining us that have probably maybe even more knowledge than we do. And we invite everybody to contribute. So I am Haley, and I'm the program director for Natural Curiosity, and I am a guest and settler on Turtle Island. And I've worked since 2015 with Natural Curiosity to act as the managing editor of the creation of the second edition of Natural Curiosity. So it's really great to have the resource out in the world and to be sharing what it's all about with educators, and to represent what Doug Anderson, our Indigenous author, has put into the lens, and support, with my role as a non-Indigenous person, how I support that learning with other educators. So I'm really excited that you've joined us for tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to Rosa to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Haley. My name is Rosa, and I am also a guest on Turtle Island. And I just want to acknowledge that we always like to say the name of the land and the first peoples of this land before introducing ourselves. And so, yeah, I am the program manager for the Natural Curiosity program at the lab school. And I've also spent the last 3 years supporting the dissemination of natural curiosity too. And I've had the privilege of working with and connecting with some incredible educators across Turtle Island. And yeah, definitely still learning, and grateful to be with you all tonight to continue that learning together.
Yeah, and just, including some newish learning. The Mississaugas, and Nancy taught us today, are called, and Rosa, I'm sure you'll be better at pronouncing it, but I'm going to give it a try because it's always important to try. The Michizagig, right? Instead of the Mississaugas of the credit. So that's the territory that Rosa and I are both coming from. All right, so Natural Curiosity, I started talking about this, but it launched in 2011, and it's a project of the laboratory school at the Dr. Eric Jackman Institute of Child Study, OISE U of T. We joke that we have the longest name, and OISE and U of T are acronyms. But Rosa's going to pop a link in the chat for a documentary about the laboratory school if you're interested in learning a little bit more. It's 25 minutes long, that's why we're not showing it tonight. But it shares about how the school does research on education and how to best support our learners within education. But its purpose is to support public education. So even though it is an independent school, the research that goes on within the school in collaboration with professors at OISE and U of T, that research is to support a public purpose. So that's what Natural Curiosity is all about, is supporting a public purpose. It also houses a Masters of Arts in Child Study and Education, as well as a BEd program. They go together. So I graduated from that program in 2007. So I am a teacher, but my main focus right now is on supporting other educators with the Natural Curiosity pedagogy. So the first edition of Natural Curiosity came out in 2011, and it was a reaction to the document Acting Today, Shaping Tomorrow, which is an Ontario ministry document that says all teachers should be incorporating environmental education, not as its own subject or topic, but integrating it into all of the learning that we're doing with our students. And so the first edition was created to support educators in figuring out how to do that. It had a 4-branch framework of inquiry-based learning, experiential learning, integrated learning, and stewardship, all under the umbrella of environmental inquiry. So, learning that is shaped by students' questions and theories about, what that they have when they explore the world around them. And so this resource found common ground with values inherent to Indigenous cultures. And one Anishinaabe elder, she said that when she read it, I cried. I said to myself, they're finally starting to get it. That's a quote from her. Starting to get it in terms of how we need to be connecting our students and our children to the land. But there was some constructive feedback that said, you know what, we could be doing such a better job of making that connection more clear. And so we listened to that. We worked with Indigenous educators, and we said our understanding when we launched the book in 2011 needed to grow. And so we worked with Indigenous communities to figure out how to do that. So whenever we bring this up, we like to say Chimigwech to our Indigenous partners. So that includes Arrowland First Nation, Seven Generations Educational Institute, and Rainy River District School Board, because the educators there convinced us that it was time to update the first edition to incorporate Indigenous perspectives. And another piece of all this is truth and reconciliation, and the importance of thinking about, as an educational institution, what is our role in supporting educators with understanding their role and their impact in first learning the truth about our country, but also supporting students so that they learn the truth, because we all know we didn't, but also thinking about how the impact that we can have with supporting our students with connecting to land, and also reconciling their relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
Sorry, struggling to play this video. There we go.
Looks like it's muted.
Hello, everybody. I'm Murray Sinclair. I'm the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about the issue of reconciliation, something which, of course, is very important to us here at the Commission, but also is of interest and importance to a lot of people in Canada. One of the things that we at the Commission have discovered is that it took us a long time to get to this point in terms of the relationship between Aboriginal people in this country. 7 generations of children went through the residential schools. And each of those children who were educated were told that their lives were not as good as the lives of the non-Aboriginal people of this country. They were told that their languages, their cultures were irrelevant. They were told that their people and their ancestors were heathens and pagans and uncivilized, and needed to give up that way of life to come to a different way of living. At the same time that was going on, non-Aboriginal children in the non-Aboriginal school systems of this country were also being told the same thing about Aboriginal people. So as a result, many generations of children, including you and your parents, have been raised to think about things in a different way, in the wrong way, in a way that is negative when it comes to Aboriginal people. And we need to change that. It was the educational system that has contributed to this problem in this country, and it's the educational system, we believe, that's going to help us to get away from this. We need to look at the way that we educate children. We need to look at the way that we educate ourselves. We need to look at what it is that our textbooks say about Aboriginal people. We need to look at what it is that Aboriginal people themselves are allowed to say within the educational system about their own histories. In addition to that, we also believe that what's important when it comes to looking at the way that children are educated is to understand that because it took us so many generations to get to this point, it's going to take us at least a few generations to be able to say that we are making progress. We cannot look for quick and easy solutions because there are none. We need to be able to look at this from the perspective of where do we want to be in 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 generations from now when we talk about the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in this country. And if we can agree on what that relationship needs to look like in the future, then what we need to think about is what can we do today that will contribute to that objective. Reconciliation will be about ensuring that everything that we do today is aimed at that high standard of restoring that balance to that relationship.
So such powerful words from Senator Marie Sinclair, and the importance of the role as educators, and also a part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we also really connect with is this quote that reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people cannot happen unless we are also reconciled with the natural world. So as the commission went across the country interviewing residential school survivors, they heard over and over again that if human beings resolve problems between themselves but continue to destroy the natural world, then reconciliation remains incomplete. So our role of connecting our students to the natural world is an essential part of the reconciliation process. So the second edition, we brought together an advisory board and worked with them for about 6 months, probably closer to a year. And they recommended that we hire an Indigenous author, and we hired Doug Anderson to help create this second edition. And with the advisory board, along with Doug, he decided that he would use the 4-branch framework of natural curiosity, but provide an Indigenous lens on each of the 4 branches, and just sort of a beginning understanding of how Indigenous perspectives relate to and can inform the work that educators are doing on the land with their students. So the first edition, as I mentioned already, had a 4-branch framework, which is shown on the left. And then we worked with Doug to create a more circular model, starting in the east from an Anishinaabe perspective, because we are coming from Anishinaabe territory, with inquiry and engagement. Doug has connected it to the idea of lighting the fire. How do we connect to the heart of the students that we are working with? Then experiential learning, Doug has connected it to sending out roots, so being deeply rooted in place. Integrated learning, he's connected it to this idea of the flow of knowledge. How does our knowledge flow and integrate in multiple ways in our lives? So not just how we integrate subjects or skills, but how do we integrate family and community and our non-human relatives? And then finally, moving towards sustainability, he connects it to breathing with the world. So how do we create a reciprocal relationship with the natural world versus seeing ourselves as above it? So I'm going to pass it over to Rosa for the next slide.
Yeah, so, but I'm not Aboriginal, and I think I certainly am not, and I think this also speaks to many of you in the room whose ancestry also stretches outside of Turtle Island. Mine goes all the way to Korea. And the same also goes for many of your students. And yet I know we are all here tonight because we share this responsibility as Canadians towards truth and reconciliation. But more importantly, I think because we as educators with a care for the environment, that's why we're here, know that we all have so much to learn from Indigenous peoples and their knowledge systems, and the important contributions that Indigenous people have already made and continue to make to our collective understanding of environmental and all education. And so this is a very simple but powerful list that comes from the preface of our resource, especially for non-Indigenous educators who are wanting to build in Indigenous perspectives into their practice and they really want to get it right. So here are some tips from Indigenous author and our advisors themselves So working with Indigenous people wherever possible. And I would just add to this, in our experience, working to find ways to work without them when they're not available. And in that process, being upfront about what we do and do not know, and being clear as much as we can that Indigenous people, cultures, and knowledge are traditional but also contemporary, and respecting their knowledge as a precious heritage, and importantly, being aware of Indigenous, the complexities of real Indigenous peoples that we work with in our communities. And so failing forward is a concept that you want to get really comfortable with just right off the bat. We know that there is a lot of apprehension when it comes to integrating an Indigenous lens into our practice. And it's for a good reason, because cultural appropriation is such a real and serious issue. But we have also heard from many of our Indigenous partners that this hesitation that you feel is a good sign. And it's because in the past, many educators have perpetuated harmful stereotypes and presented misinformation as facts. And so it's great that you're feeling this. But I want to share a little story that was shared with us from another elder, a Mississauga elder named Peter Schuler, who we connected with over the years. And when we told him and when we shared with him about this, sense of fear that many educators were experiencing around this work, including ourselves, he said, it's okay to take time and figure out how to do this. But if you stay too long in that state of paralysis, then it becomes a cop out. And so we just want to share his wisdom and share Doug's words, who echoes Peter's teaching when he says that many Indigenous elders are actually happy with educators trying their best and learning from their mistakes. It is better to innovate with Indigenous perspectives in steps that fit actual learning contexts than to try to implement many aspects of the ideas being shared here all at once. And so the inevitable persistence of misconception should not stop us from trying to provide learning environments informed by Indigenous perspectives. And so small steps and failing forward is a lot better than trying to get it perfectly at, all at once, or not really trying at all. And so in a moment, we want to try, I know many of you have your cameras turned off, but we want to try what we call a knowledge building circle. And this is a really integral process of environmental inquiry and the inquiry that takes place at the lab school. And so we're going to explain how this is going to work, and we are going to break out into 2 groups. And we would like to ask you to turn on your cameras if possible, and also unmute yourselves when we share the protocol. And so if we were to do this in real life, we'd be getting up from our seats and rearranging the room right now, but I'll just kind of go over the principles of knowledge building first. And so there are many principles of a KBC. So there's 12, and I see Chris popping in to say hi. And one of them is collective responsibility. So a knowledge building circle promotes a sense of responsibility towards the success of all members around the circle. And it encourages empathy and values different perspectives, voices, and skills that come out of this discourse. And so around the circle are some of the language that we can provide our students and our learners who are trying this out for the first time. So I want to build on your idea, another perspective, or I want to challenge, how do we explore your idea further? And I would like to share more about knowledge building, but maybe I'll do that in the chat. And I just wanted to share how knowledge building circles are also connected to Indigenous talking circles. And we're not saying that, one is the same as the other, but simply recognizing that knowledge building is not a new idea. And this tradition of sitting in circle and sharing knowledge and growing that knowledge together has existed on this land since time immemorial. And so these are some of the connections to Indigenous talking circles that Doug, our Indigenous author, has identified in our resource. And I'll just read them out loud. So, a common purpose to what is being discussed, speaking from the heart, non interference, all are heard who wish to be heard, and deep consideration and respect for the people as well as what is being shared.
So Rosa, why don't you just break us into our groups, and then we'll explain the protocol to our specific group.
Sure, I can do that. Do you want me to share the question first?
Oh yeah.
Do you want to share the question and then we'll go into
Yes.
the protocol? Okay.
Yeah. And then if we can we'll make sure to put the question in the chat, but we both have the access to the question. So
For sure.
sure. Yeah. Because then we can go through the protocol in our smaller groups.
Sounds good.
So with knowledge building, we don't discuss it as a group questions that are Googleable. We talk about questions that we might not find the answer to and that take time to really think about. So our question for you today is posed by Doug Anderson in the 4th branch of Natural Curiosity on reciprocity. And he says, how can we help children develop a culture where they have an ongoing, intimate, and deeply informed relationship with their environment, rather than a sense that their environment must somehow be protected from them and managed by experts? Connecting to Larissa's keynote about national parks. How can we help future generations shift from suffering with the burden of stewardship for the environment to a life of active participation in, coupled with deep love and respect for Mother Earth? So Rosa will break us into 2 groups, and we'll talk about how we will participate in a knowledge building circle for 10 minutes together. Thanks, Rosa.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So
I think I sent us all back when we still had like, because even when you close, it's like you have 30 seconds. But so the other group will be joining us in a moment. But thank you so much for, hopefully if you didn't get a chance to speak, you still felt like you were a part of the learning that was happening. So Rosa's just, everybody's joining from her group. And just a reminder as Rosa gets our slideshow up again, that knowledge building circles are just one way to build knowledge. So having a one-on-one conversation or journaling or small group discussion, like there are multiple ways to build knowledge as a group. But knowledge building circles are a great one to involve an entire classroom or group of students. So yeah. So Rosa, do you have, is the PowerPoint up and ready? Awesome. So I think we're going to skip this video for now, just looking at the time. We always overplan and never have time to do everything we want to do, but as educators, I'm sure you know that very well. So Rosa, if you don't mind, we could just put this, a link to this KBC in the chat. So if you're interested in seeing what this process is like with young children, this video of Zoe and her class is a great example. So yeah. So we'll go to our next slide. And actually, we're just going to jump, because this is our 4-branch framework, we're going to jump right into inquiry and engagement. As I see, we only have about 20 minutes left. So this branch used to be called inquiry-based learning, but we changed it to inquiry and engagement to really focus on the fact that student engagement is an integral part of the inquiry process. Because we found as inquiry-based learning got more and more popular, sometimes that component still got left out. And so we want to really make sure that our students' ideas and theories and questions and what they're excited about get incorporated into the learning so that they're deeply engaged, but not just with their minds. We want to also deeply engage their hearts. So we're going to have a little quick activity. And I say 99% of the time, forget to ask people to do this. But if you don't have a scrap piece of paper or a piece of paper near you right now, just do this in your head. It's totally fine. But if you have a piece of paper near you, we're going to do a little experience that's sort of going to represent what we mean by inquiry and engagement and lighting the fire. So I'm just ripping off a piece of paper here. You're going to fold it in half. If you have a piece of goose paper and there is like good on one side and there's writing on this, on the inside, you can just fold it like this so that there isn't writing on any of your paper. So on the front of your little booklet, I'm going to give you like 10 seconds because we're running out of time to draw a tree. Go. So we like to joke that we can read your minds, because usually when we don't give people a lot of time and we don't give them much instruction, or we don't invite you to bring yourselves to this learning in this tree, most of your trees probably looked something like this. Raise your hand or show your tree if it looked like that. Some people made, especially because, you know, we're just coming in, well, at least in Ontario, spring's just, well, it snowed today and yesterday. So, but some people's trees might look a little like this. Yeah. So now what we're going to get you to do is we're going to get you to open up your little book, and we're going to give you a little bit more time. But on the inside of your booklet, we'd like you to think about and then draw a tree that means something to you, a tree that you've spent time with, a tree that you have a memory with, or as one of our colleagues likes to say, a tree that knows you best. So we'll give you about 30 seconds to do that. Again, it's not about the product, just the process. You can draw it, you can write about it, you can close your eyes and think about it. And if we weren't meeting in a virtual context, we would hopefully be outside and have you actually doing this under a tree or in nature, to maybe spark some of those memories. But what this was meant to represent is how learning is different and how learning is more engaging when we actually ask you to bring your heart to that learning. So to bring your story, your history, possibly where you come from, your family, the land that you've grown up on or spent time on, when we ask you to bring those things to the learning. And so if I keep saying this, if we had more time, but I'm going to continue to say it, we would have you share the story of your tree with one or two other people. And we would, through that process, when you do that, we learn so much about each other. And that's also an important part about learning, is learning all these different things about the community that we are in and how that makes learning so much more powerful and engaging. And so that's just a really quick experience that kind of shows the difference between, we kind of like to joke that this is the art project where every single kid's artwork looks exactly the same, right? Whereas when we ask you to draw a tree that means something to you, we're really asking you to bring a part of you to the learning. So these are some words from Doug Anderson. He says, inquiry-based learning reflects a simple, profound truth. Learning is most powerful when rooted in the heart. The heart is our connection to spirit, which in turn is what unifies all things. The heart is the seat of the fire, igniting our whole being. So we're moving on to experiential learning, branch 2. And we like to laugh at this David Sobel quote because it often happens in education, where the opportunity to explore the ditch gets replaced by memorizing lists of the plants you might find if you actually went to the ditch. So we learn so much about the natural world by books versus actually going out and exploring, which we know increases engagement. So when we talk about experiential learning, when you do word association, most teachers will say hands-on. And yes, we are all about hands-on experiential learning. But what we like to also say is we need to bring the minds on into that conversation. So we need to actually have learning experiences where we learn with our hands and our experiences, but then we need to reflect on those experiences to have deep learning, reflect ourselves, but also reflect in community. So what you learn from that experience, you can share with me and I can learn as well. And so that's so important. Then also we've said hands-on, minds on, and as we just talked about, hearts on. How do we bring our hearts to those learning experiences? And so Doug Anderson, again, our Indigenous author, says, we're taking steps towards Indigenous understanding when we take students outside and provide opportunities for them to use all their senses to make fundamental connections with as many aspects of the world around them as recommended in Natural Curiosity. An Indigenous approach challenges us to ask, how do we deepen our relationship with the place we are in? How do we send out roots? So Rosa's going to pop a video in the chat. Again, we don't have time to watch it, but we just want to share it with you because it is a video of kindergarten students in a school just outside of Fort Frances, Ontario, who've created a deep connection to some land that is just a walking distance from their school. And these kids, I think, are now in grade 2, and they've advocated to their older grade teachers, maybe grade 3 now, to take them back to this place. Even as they go up the grades in their school. So just shows how important it is to create these, as Chris said, go back to these places over and over again. So I'm going to pass it off to Rosa to talk a little bit about integrated learning and the flow of knowledge. Oh, you're muted. I know, we always do it.
Moving on to branch 3 of Natural Curiosity, which is integrated learning. And I know that we consider all kinds of integration to engage students and to make learning more accessible for students. So we're integrating everything from subject areas to curriculum strands to critical thinking skills and 21st century skills and perspectives. And I know, Haley, you tell a funny little story about how early in your practice we're trying to integrate art and math and social sciences and everything great into one, unit or integrated plan, or all kinds of wonderful things that we try to do. But often we miss that point, that and the recognition that everything is already interconnected in reality. And so I'm just going to move on right on to I love this perspective from Doug when he shares that integrating themes and subjects is a natural outcome of a common purpose. And so the flow of knowledge, when we feel something urgently together, our human family, all the people in our place, is most motivated to address the integrated nature of reality. This is when all the various experts work hardest to connect their separate knowledge. And deep inside, everybody intuitively knows the interconnectedness of all things. If we can focus on the big idea rather than separate pieces of the curriculum by using disconnected examples, then we can bring together the strands of knowledge that different individuals are drawn to personally and learn about different subjects together in the most memorable ways. So I think we're all so, aware in many painful ways, actually, because of COVID, how interconnected we really are. But we have also seen lots of amazing examples of communities coming together to rise to meet the challenge. And so just going back to that video that we saw of Senator Murray Sinclair, and when he asks, where do we want to be in 7 generations from now? What skills and knowledge and ideas and gifts of children do we need to integrate in order to get through this very complex time in humanity and to that restored place of balance between ourselves, between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and also with the natural world. And so time is always something to integrate as well into our perspective. Moving on to the 4th branch of Natural Curiosity. And we've talked about this, and I hate that our breakout room session felt like 2 minutes, because that conversation was so lovely and lots of people were having wonderful ideas about this shift from stewardship to sustainability. And actually in the first edition, this little brown book, the 4th branch was called Stewardship. And we changed that to moving towards sustainability to reflect our growing understanding about the kind of learning that we want students to experience. And because, not always, but stewardship can often imply that, humans are separate from nature, whether we're protecting it or hurting it, we are separate from it and acting on it. And so sustainability kind of captures that, but the Indigenous lens, breathing with the world, and the emphasis on reciprocity that Doug lays on this branch even challenges the notion of sustainability, because often sustainability can be about asking, how do we continue using the earth? And how do we use it more efficiently so we can continue to live in this way, in this unsustainable way? And so breathing with the world is really about how do we begin to use the earth more, and how do we begin to use the natural world in a reciprocal manner and connect to it more deeply and more actively, and how do we apply our learning in active practices and regular practices of gratitude and reciprocity. And so I want to share a story that comes just an example of the 4th.
Rosa, I don't know if because we're technically supposed to be taking questions in 1 minute.
Yes. Okay.
So I don't know why don't you put your beautiful link to your article?
Yeah, I will.
That Rosa wrote about this story. But just the gist of, sorry, I interrupted you, Rosa, but the gist of it is the lab schools deepening their connection to the place outside of their school. So you can see the students pulling out the hostas. And then in the next photo that was there, the medicinal and indigenous, and so you could see sage and sweetgrass were grown. And so just really changing our relationship to that place. So Rosa's going to find the link so that we can talk a little bit more. But I do want to honor that people might have questions for us, Rosa.
Yeah, thank you, Haley. I wasn't watching the time. And just one takeaway. So yeah, we invite you to reflect in some ways. Something that you've done in the past that might have focused on stewardship, and you can share this in the chat too, and reflect in some ways that that activity or project could be done to reflect a sense of reciprocity and breathing with the world. So take that home with you. I know you're all home.
And just quickly, we wanted to share that Natural Curiosity has this 4-branch framework, but the whole second half of the resource are educators sharing practice, because that's an integral part of this process. So if you want to read how, you know, a grade 2 teacher is thinking about doing that, has done this in their class, it's a great opportunity to say, oh, okay, I can see how I could do that, or how I could do that in a way that meets the needs of the children I'm working with. So we get lots of positive feedback about the educator stories in the back of the book and how it inspired teachers to take those small steps in making change in their practice. And we just want to end with this quote because it's so important, from Doug Anderson, that Indigenous perspectives cannot be deeply reflected in a written document or outside of their cultural contexts. All that can be provided here in the resource are some indications of how such perspectives can inform environmental inquiry. The living and moving spirits of students, educators, and communities are needed for transforming awareness over time into understanding, knowledge, and eventually wisdom. So we want to open it up for any questions. We do have some other resources, some things like our social media. We do have a newsletter that goes out every month that sends educator resources, educator stories. So we'll be popping those in the chat, but we do want to open it up for possible questions too.
And please feel free to type your questions if that's where you're at.
Or we can just keep talking too.
Leanne says the language we use is very important. And yes, thank you to Christina and Catherine for sharing your stories.
If you had to choose 5, well, why doesn't everybody start putting those in the chat? 5 key words you wanted kids to remember, what would they be? Okay, language is important. But I think also the experience that goes along with the language is also important. You know, like I'd love to say reciprocity, but I feel like you have to experience that to really understand it too. Yeah. Rosa, do you want to keep going through the slides as we see if there are any other questions, just so that we've got about 1 minute.
Just want to let you all know that we have an educator Slack, which is a communication forum. We have over 250 educators joined to discuss these ideas around natural curiosity. And so if you're interested in being a part, then let me know in the chat, but I'll post a link that you can also access yourself. And while you're all here, an easy way for me to find you and add you to the Slack would be, if you're interested, you can sign up for our newsletter as well. And we have created a special discount code for the people who attended this workshop. And so we'll just keep that open. I'm popping that link in the chat. Okay, great, Christina, I'll put that up.
I see Katrina's asking, I wonder how to work with students who have trouble focusing in the outdoors. I wonder, like, is that your experience that you've had children that have trouble with that? Because I've often found, and anecdotally, we've heard from so many educators that often the kids that struggle with attention inside don't have those same challenges when going outside. And obviously for the first couple times, because it's such a new experience, there might be sort of sensory overload. So it is still challenging, but if it is routinely brought in, we've heard over and over again that those sort of sometimes possible attention or behavioral issues that are manifesting or showing up in the classroom are not as prevalent when those students are taken outside. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that, if they have an anecdotal experience of that as well. But knowledge building circles also honor student voice. So that is really powerful for engaging those kids that maybe are having trouble focusing. If they're actually listened to, right? Like that's a big part of knowledge building circles, or this growing our knowledge as a group. That can be powerful for a lot of students. And then also some of those kids whose skills in a classroom setting, they don't often succeed in a conventional sort of classroom context, but they, when they go outside, when verbal skills are not the most important, when, like writing or even verbal skills, but they can build a structure or build a dam, then these skills that these students have are valued, and you're seeing a new side of your students that you might not have seen if you didn't take them outside, which can be really powerful as well.
Haley, I just wanted to build on to what you were saying, because I believe that there's a body of research showing looking at children with ADHD and nature as a form of treatment, so to speak, for that. So I think you could probably, you could Google that research if you're interested in knowing more.
Mm-hmm. So we do acknowledge that it is 8:02. We're happy to stick around if anyone has any questions. I know, Rosa, you didn't get to talk about, but we do have a teacher educator award that submissions are open right now until May 7th, I believe. So you could nominate yourself, or you could nominate somebody else who is really trying to incorporate environmental inquiry as well as Indigenous perspectives into their practice. But we want to honor your time. So if you want to head out, please feel free to do so. But we'll hang out for a bit longer in case anyone has any questions.
For sure. And on your way out, just want to say, Shini Gretchen, thank you so much for joining us.
Mm-hmm. Rosa, do you want to stop sharing your screen? Then we can just see everybody.
Yeah. Stop recording as well.
Sure.